Hey everyone, today I'm back in Dream Car Builder and I wanted to try making a portable stunt jump. So, let's get right into it. So I'm starting off in the sandbox like I almost always do, and I lied to you a little bit. Now I'm still making a stunt jump car, but at the time I was actually torn between making a bridge and a stunt jump car since the mechanisms to make both of them are actually pretty similar. So it really could have gone either way. I was just sort of playing it by ear to see which one I wanted to do. So while I was rambling about that, I started making a suspension, and you can see as I go to test it here, it sort of just folds in on itself. Now I realized my problem was that I forgot to support this in the Z-axis, so after adding in a bunch of framing pieces to increase its rigidity a little bit, now as I load in you can see the springs compress and absorb the load of the fall. Now they compressed a lot more than I liked, so what I did is increase the hardness of the springs, and you can see now they're compressing much less. So with that I wanted to start adding in the wheels. So I added in a point directly in between the springs, and then connected the wheels to them, and then added in a couple more springs to that point. But as I go to test it, the wheels seemed completely rigid, and this was almost as if the springs were doing absolutely nothing. So I decreased the hardness of the springs again, but that still didn't seem to be the problem. And I realized the issue was that I can't have the wheels directly attached to each other. They actually need to be separated a little bit like this. So after doing that, and then adding in a couple more springs, now as I go to test it, you can see the wheels compress a little bit, and seem to be absorbing the load of the fall. So I basically just copied what I had up front to the back and decided to give it another run. And so far it seemed to be working, but it's really hard to tell without the car moving at all. So that's what I wanted to do next. So I just added in an engine like this, and then added in a few transmissions to connect it to all the wheels. Now if we give it a quick run, immediately the front wheels end up folding in on themselves, and I guess it's because the engine is too heavy. And if I try to run the car, the back wheels fold in on themselves. So that was a start. So increase the hardness of all of these springs, and then move the springs that were directly attached to the wheels out a little bit more to hopefully increase their strength. And this seemed to really improve things. Now the frame of the car was still a little bit flimsy, which I didn't like. So what I did is added in a few more framing pieces like this, and then used a bunch of cross braces to increase the strength of the car. And after doing that, the car seemed to be perfectly rigid. So the next thing I wanted to focus on was the steering. So to do that, I just added in a couple rods to push in and out the wheels, and this seemed to sort of be working. You see the wheels are rotating a little bit here. So what I did is just turn down their intensity a bit more, and while the wheels were turning, I also noticed the front suspension was really getting distorted when I tried to turn. And this distortion really made it easy for it to just fold in on itself while I was going around turns. So I ended up scrapping that idea, and instead going for this. Now basically what I have here is just the front half and the back half of the car attached only by a single point, and then two rods on each side to rotate the front of the car a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right. And now as I give it a quick test here, you can see how that works. And it didn't distort the front geometry at all, but it did do that when I tried to turn. Now I had realized my problem was that I connected the front and back halves of the car with just a single node, and what I actually was going to need was two nodes, so it acted more like a hinge instead of a ball joint. And after doing that, the car seemed to be turning fine, so I just increased the strength of the suspension, and moved the wheels out further from each other so I had a bit better stability. Now if we give it a quick run here, you can see seems to be turning fine, and it was good enough that I thought it was probably about time to start focusing on the stunt jump part of this. So I decided to hide the driver here as well. There was no practical benefit to doing that, I just did it so I felt like showing you. And now I want to focus on what I'm going to call like a box. So what this is just four nodes I'm going to have suspended above the rest of the car. I can start building the rest of my mechanisms off of. Now I had a small problem here where when I tried to turn the car, you can see the box gets very distorted. And I was hoping to have this be stable. So I realized the problem is I had support points attached directly to the front wheels, which when they tried to turn would really distort the geometry. So I just had to move those further into the car. So after doing that, now I have this, which was stable, except for the fact that I was able to rotate like that. So all I had to do is add in a few more framing pieces to fix that, and now finally, you can see as I turn, this box doesn't get distorted at all, but I'm still able to drive around. So now I'm adding in a few framing pieces and a couple of rods. I'm doing this so I can create a mechanism to expand roads out a far distance from the car. And I want this so that I can create a really long roadway for cars to drive on, but be able to compact it into a small space. So I start by putting in those rods, and you can see I do get some expansion, but it's just not really enough. But I had a new idea, and this one I wanted to try since the start of the episode. So by putting in two more framing pieces, and then a couple of midpoints like this, if I attach the midpoints together, now as I just run the simulation, you can see that we have these two rods that are connected together at the middle. And ideally I could use this to create a scissor mechanism to be able to expand out the top points just by contracting the bottom 2 points, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. So I move that into a more convenient place, and then put in that rod that I'm going to use to contract contract the bottom. And then finally, after just supporting it properly, you can see as I contract the rod how that X expands out quite a bit. And this mechanism is great because I'll be able to stack a bunch of them together and get a ton of distance out of just a small contraction distance. So I also decided to move it to the center of the car, just makes it a little bit easier to work with, especially later when I add in a second one of these. And now if I give it another run, you can see it works the same way as before. So now I'm going to stack a bunch of these together to show you how I can get a ton of expansion out of just a little bit of contraction. So as I run it here, you can see it's loose. It's not being propped up by anything, but if I contract in the rod, all of the X's sort of expand out and create this massive mess, and then they can contract back in. So now with that kind of working, I wanted to add in the second mechanism like I talked about before. So this one's identical to the first one, it's just going to be offset by a few meters. And now if I run it, it works the same way as the first one, you can see. But the idea is if I connect them together like this, it should allow these two mechanisms to expand and contract while still staying rigid in the X and Y directions. But after doing that, now if I give it another test, you can see how the entire mechanism just expands out and I got a bunch of these stacked X's. So this expansion is great. It's not exactly what I want though. Instead of having the roadways expanding towards the sky, I want them expanding backwards. So to do that, basically I'm going to make a little trailer here, and I'm doing that just by copying the suspension of my first car. Then after tying everything together, give it a quick run here. All seems to work out. And what I'll do is throw that scissor mechanism that I had on top of my first car onto the back of this trailer so that I'll be able to tow it behind me. So I didn't really show that too much because it's basically just a mirror copy of what I already had, but I just put that in place and it seems to work. So now if I add more of these X segments to it, you can see it expands out even further. So I decided to switch to the canyon map, since I was just looking for a change of scenery since I was kind of tired of looking at the motorway map. And the next thing I did was just stack a bunch more of the scissor mechanisms on top of each other. And after doing that, I was getting a pretty good extension distance, but I just kind of wanted to go crazy with this. So I needed a couple optimizations, and the first one was shrinking down the scissor mechanisms when they're initially folded, since there is a maximum car size, so the more I can shrink these mechanisms when they're folded up, the more of them I can fit, so I can get more expansion. That's what I was doing there. And I'm also telling the rods that extend out the scissor mechanism to contract even further, which gives me a further expansion distance for the scissor. So I have that little proof of concept working for just a single one of those scissor mechanisms. And now I'm just stacking a bunch of them together to give it another test. And I'm also setting all the frames to be blue, since it was a little hard to see the tan frames against the tan background. But after doing that, I'm getting a pretty crazy extension distance out of these things. So I decided to delete them. Well, not exactly. Now it was time for me to add on the platforms that the cars can actually drive on. So I started off by adding in two panels like this, and then using two framing pieces to attach them to the scissor. And as I extended out, you can see how the panels end up rotating out a little bit. So I adjusted their position a little bit, and now as I extend out the platform, you can see they fold out in a way that covers the scissor mechanism much better. Now I had some problems with them kind of contorting in weird ways, so to fix that, I had to add in a couple more support framing pieces, but after doing that, I got it folding out properly. So this meant that I had half of the scissor mechanism covered by panels, and I was only going to need to figure out how to add in two more panel sets. So I changed all the panels to being black since the red didn't really match the blue, and then finally just copied it back a bunch so I can give it another go here. And you can see as I expand it out, all the panels end up folding into those triangle shapes. And now I just need to figure out how to fill in these extra holes. So I thought it was probably going to be easy enough, so I just mirrored what I put in the front into the back like this. But now as I try to expand them out, you can see they end up just overlapping instead of filling in the extra gaps. So I deleted those panels and instead put them in a different place like this. And now you can see as I expand out the mechanism, this new triangle covers most of the hole. So I just had to adjust its geometry a little bit, and after doing that, it pretty much completely covers that back hole. So this I pretty much just copied over to the front, and now if I give it another run, you can see almost all of the scissor mechanisms covered by panels. There's just this little triangle, just this little sliver left over. So I just had to adjust the front panel's geometry a little bit, and finally I had this solid black rectangle that gets filled in when I expand out the panels. So once I had that, I just copied it all the way over to the back, and now the scissor mechanism creates this straight roadway all the way back that cars can drive on. Now the two panels in the back are a little messed up, and this is because they expand out so quickly the panels fold in a weird way, so I just have to increase their strength a little bit to make that work. And now I just have a couple final problems to deal with. One of them is that this trailer makes it almost impossible to drive, so I decided to just actually scrap the trailer altogether and just directly attach my scissor mechanism to the car itself. And this should make handling not a complete disaster. So I just had to rebrace it, and finally here I'm putting in a little bit of a ramp for cars to drive in on, because I wanted to give this a little bit of a multiplayer test. And I just put in a couple panels here, these are totally just temporary, to try to get cars on the rest of the panels. So testing it out seems to work well enough, but as I tried connecting to the server, I got this error message, and I probably should have expected this. A car can only have 30 collision panels, and all of those panels I just put on, I had set collision for. So this was like probably 60 or 70 panels. So I had to like turn off collision for about half of the panels and give this another test. So basically this just means I can't make my little bridge or stunt jump as long as I wanted to originally, but at least there's the easy fix of just turning off the collision for some of the front panels. But I still ran into problems where when I tried to expand, my car seemed to wrap back over to the front somehow. This was really weird, and to be honest, I'm not exactly sure how this happened. So basically, the new strategy was just to shrink this down a lot more, and just not have as long as a stunt jump. It really shouldn't be a problem, it was already way longer than it needed to be, so this should just be all good. Now if I extend it out, you can see for the most part it works. And if I have a couple guys drive on the platform, it seems to lift them up and they seem to be able to jump off of it. Now I don't have the angle set that well, so it's pretty flat, so they don't get that much air. But at least the proof of concept works that cars are able to drive on this. So finally what I did is added in a little bit of a retracting ramp like this, that I'm able to extend out. And after doing that, I just basically retextured everything and made it kind of look like a truck. And now I can drive it around, and if I stop it, and if I hit H on my keyboard, it extends out the scissor mechanism, extends out the little ramp at the end, and also opens up the back and the top of the truck. So this should allow cars to drive into this and just fly out the top. And I'll give it a quick multiplayer test right here. So guys, thanks for watching. I'm glad I got to use this mechanism finally. I used it in a polybridge video, but I really wanted to have it be the heart of one of my designs, so I'm happy it turned out here. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask below, and otherwise, until next time.